As anticipated, Day 12 of the Diddy trial would consist of the usual fare of more paperwork and procedural submissions. The turning point came, however, when Eddie Murphy used an alternate entrance to the courthouse. The jury leaned in, Diddy froze, and reporters jolted upright. Even most of the legal teams there were unaware that Eddie was going to be a witness. What he uttered while swearing had an impact much beyond the confines of the courtroom. Eddie started by saying, "I've been quiet for decades, but after what I saw, I had to step away from Hollywood, and I've carried that weight ever since." Seated upright in the witness chair, Eddie Murphy wore a sharp suit and maintained an image of unwavering composure, yet his eyes bared the burden of a history that predated his Hollywood career. He was forthright in responding to the judge's request that he identify himself for the record. Then he turned to see Diddy, who was seated at the defense table with a pitiful expression on his face. Unexpectedly, Eddie repositioned the microphone and uttered, "I left Hollywood because I saw too much, and because I couldn't unsee it." He kept his voice down. That wasn't necessary. Courtroom spectators leaned in. When Eddie first started telling his tale, he was in the midst of a professional renaissance in 2006. There has been an uptick in a number of high-profile proposals, including new studio deals and discussions about awards. According to him, there was an abundance of labor. "The phone was ringing every day. I was being courted like I was in my 20s again." That is until a famous producer discreetly called one night with an invitation. According to him, a private house in the Hollywood Hills was the site of a meeting. Not a thing planned, just the type of gathering where connections are solidified and careers are launched. Curious yet wary, Murphy consented to go. He claimed to have known about these get-togethers for quite some time. All of Hollywood's A-listers have. The notorious Diddy networking events, where attendees were instructed to simply enjoy the experience, and phones were confiscated and photography was forbidden. "I thought it was business as usual," Eddie remarked. "Music, drinks, people posturing. But when I pulled up, I knew immediately something was off." Upon reaching a vast estate, he detailed an iron gate that required biometric scanning in order to access. At the curb, valets dressed in black matched him, snatched his phone, and presented him with a little note that read, "Only one phrase tonight. Be who you really are." The energy within felt unsettling rather than exhilarating. Playing silently, minimize background noise, speaks softly, and looks blankly. Similar to a cathedral, it was silent, but not in a sacred sense. Rather, it seemed haunted. Upon entering the main area, Eddie took stock of his surroundings. Some of the performers he encountered were old friends, some he had worked with, and yet others were completely unknown at such occasions. Everyone was acting abnormally, including the sportsmen and businessmen. Not intoxicated, not completely outré. I only computed, measured. They seemed to be aware that someone was watching them. Afterwards, he was muted as a guy in a robe and a lady in heels made their way to a side hall. "That's when it really hit me," Eddie relayed to the judge. "This wasn't about celebration. This was about power." Eddie was questioned by the prosecutor about his decision to remain for an additional few minutes. The answer was, "Because I needed to understand. I needed to see it for myself. And God forgive me, I did." Diddy, who Eddie hadn't seen in years, approached him after he'd been aimlessly wandering for a while, according to Eddie. He walked up to me like we were old friends, threw his arm around my shoulder and said, "Brother, it's about time you came home." In response to the memories, Murphy forced a little grin, which immediately disappeared. He didn't mean Hollywood. He meant this. Eddie said Diddy exuded confidence and serenity, yet there was an icy quality to his expression. He walked me through the house like he was proud of something. Not the art, not the space. He was proud of what was happening inside those rooms. While strolling, Diddy discreetly murmured to other guests, stating things like, "That guy just greenlit a $200 million film," or, "That one? He eats out of my hand now." However, the most unsettling part occurred when Diddy halted in front of a sturdy wooden door and directed his attention on Eddie. He looked me dead in the face and said, "This is where the choices get made. You want to stay funny and broke, or you want to level up?" Assuming it was an elaborate Hollywood prank, Eddie attempted to shrug it off, according to him. Diddy, though, remained silent. He did nothing except look, anticipating a response. Murphy then became aware of something else. A camera tripod was inside the room, visible via a small opening in the door. Not concealed. Clearly visible. I saw people go in that room looking nervous. I saw them come out either grinning like they won the lottery, or looking hollow. Eddie remained mute. On the contrary, he retreated, acting as though he were thirsty. Once again flashing a smile, Diddy proclaimed, "No rush, we're all family here." With that, he vanished into a corridor. That moment was the first real warning sign, he added. The line in the sand. It stopped being a party and started feeling like an initiation. To get some fresh air, he took a short stroll outdoors, but a woman standing at the doorway stopped him. "Are you through with it yet?" she said, offering him a drink. Nobody leaves before the experience. He couldn't get the phrase, "the experience," out of his mind. The main lounge was re-entered by Murphy. His worst fears were validated by the next sight. Eddie remembered the scene with a steady voice. Something he's seen would remain etched in his memory indelibly. They took a group of us into a back room. The lights were dim. Music was gone. There were velvet drapes, candles, and a long table with nothing but silver trays on top. A number of famous people, including an up-and-coming action star whose identity he was hesitant to reveal, were there to greet him. However, he did confirm, Dwayne Johnson, when questioned by the prosecutor. A somber stillness enveloped the space. As if he were the host of a dinner theater, Diddy stood at the head of the table and grinned. "Tonight, the focus is on your potential," he said to the room, "because greatness doesn't come cheap. Y'all want to run Hollywood? Show me." Dwayne Johnson was presented with a tray. No problem. Finished or refined. A gloved guy removed the cover. Raw monkey brains are underneath it. Persistently pink. Not letting up yet. In an uncomfortable way, a few people in the room managed to giggle. Some of them averted their eyes. However, Diddy made it clear, saying, "Come on, Rock. You eat that. The role is yours." The following events were described by Eddie with a hint of crack in his voice. Dwayne was uncertain, perused the area. Subsequently, he executed it. I simply swallowed and continued on. A proud father's clap accompanied Diddy's. "That's exactly what I'm referring to," he said, his gaze sweeping over the whole guest list. "Who's next?" "I froze," Eddie claimed. "I felt sick. I looked for the door." However, Diddy subsequently approached and positioned himself before him. His words dripped with authority as he addressed Murphy. "You ready, preacher boy?" To which Murphy said, "I wasn't expecting this." And then Diddy muttered, "Then why are you here?" Eddie then proceeded to explain leaving that room while the court sat in stunned silence, strolling, yet with intent. "I wasn't scared of what they'd do to me. I was scared of what they could do to others." Diddy said, "You'll be back when you're ready to really make it." as he departed. Uncle Eddie never came back. Additionally, his approach to working in Hollywood was forever changed. "I informed him I was a man of God," Eddie stated as he gradually adjusted his posture in the witness chair. "And I meant it. I told him I wasn't going to participate. I wasn't going to eat anything. I wasn't going to sign anything. And I sure wasn't going to lose my soul to fit into whatever circle that was." He glanced across at the jurors and waited. And that's when Diddy made it known. If you don't play the game plays you. After declining Diddy's offer to take part in the so-called experience, Murphy said he became a target, symbolically rather than physically. "The way he made fun of me," Eddie said while shook his head. He turned to the room and said, "Look at this church boy. He thinks Faith is going to book him a franchise." Laughing filled the room, whether it was uneasy or forced laughing, but it was sufficient. When asked if he was humiliated, Eddie denied it. "I was disgusted. I realized that the party wasn't about testing who was loyal. It was about finding out who was desperate." Something was going to change, Eddie stated once he left the mansion that night. "I didn't just walk out of a party. I walked out of Hollywood's inner chamber. The part nobody talks about. The one behind the velvet rope where favors are traded for silence and humiliation is currency." As time went on, things began to shift. An abrupt halt was placed on projects that had previously been approved. They recast the parts that were originally written for him. After 7 years, his agency suddenly stopped responding his calls. Someone who had before complimented his work allegedly said to a co-worker, "He's not aligned anymore." As he proceeded, Eddie maintained a fixed gaze forward. The question, "aligned with what exactly?" prompted his pursuit of clarification. "That's what I kept asking. Aligned with Diddy? Aligned with monkey brains and candlelit rituals?" His demeanor was composed and collected, devoid of anger. However, the underlying sadness was undeniable. "They didn't need to fire me. They didn't need to cancel me. They just needed to not call me. That's how the real blacklist works. You don't hear a gunshot, just silence." Keeping active was something Murphy said he did for a long. He penned screenplays, proposed novel concepts, conducted voiceovers. However, an impassable obstacle was there. People smiled in meetings, said all the right things, but nothing happened. Nothing stuck. "It's like I was floating just outside the gates." His final statement slammed into the courtroom as he concluded the segment. "You don't have to sell your soul in Hollywood, but if you don't, they'll convince everyone that you never had one to begin with." Eddie Murphy was unapologetic when asked straight up whether he thought he was on a blacklist. The answer was yes, he stated, and not in a dramatic, headline-grabbing way, in the quietest, most precise way possible. That's how the machine does it, with whispers, not warnings. He described the mechanism in detail. There's no memo that goes out. No studio head saying, "Ban this person." But there are dinners, there are calls. There are little meetings behind frosted glass where someone says, "He's a liability." Now, Eddie elaborated on how his reputation took a nosedive in the rooms he had previously owned following the party. "Eddie didn't pass the test," one high-ranking CEO informed a buddy. When the friend wanted to know what that meant, the executive just responded, "He said no when he was supposed to say yes." Before proceeding, Murphy inhaled deeply. That was all it took. One no, one refusal. And the doors don't slam, they just don't open anymore. He reflected on how his squad started to thin down in the years that followed. Back when he was touted as a sure bet at the box office, producers started to distance themselves. Studio after studio that had requested him to meet with them suddenly said they were too busy or had budgetary restrictions. "I watched the work disappear in slow motion," he pointed out. "I'd submit pitches and get no reply. I'd meet with networks and they'd nod through the whole meeting and then ghost me." According to him, you start to question yourself. You start to think maybe it's just timing. Maybe it's the market. But then you hear the whispers, the things they say behind closed doors. The court recognized the prosecution's email evidence, which included a studio executive's signature and the words, "Not aligned, pass." Eddie's name was included in the email. Murphy went over to the microphone. "I want the court to understand something. Hollywood's blacklist doesn't wear a name tag. It wears a smile, and it shakes your hand while it erases you." He claimed that the machine saw him as tough and ungrateful because he refused to take part in the party rituals, and, even worse, because he decided to leave. "I was tagged," he continued, "not for causing harm, but for refusing to be harmed." Next, he struck a more profound chord. There are people whose careers vanished because they turned down the same parties, because they saw what I saw and didn't want to play along. And we act like it's coincidence. It's not. With a somber realism, Eddie concluded the part. Hollywood doesn't just make movies, it makes myths. And the biggest myth of all is that success is about talent. It's not. It's about compliance. The defense wasted no time in requesting a sidebar when Eddie revealed the most incriminating part of his evidence to FAR, which sent screams reverberating through the crowd. Eddie mentioned that there was a list. An unwritten one. Everyone in the industry knows about it. It's the people you don't criticize, the ones you don't question. Because if you do, you're gone. Courtroom tensions rose. The judge cautioned him against speculation. I nodded, "Eddie, I'm not speculating, Your Honor. I lived it." He said again, "Diddy's on that list. Tyler Perry's on that list. Oprah Winfrey, she helped write it." In their chairs, the jury members moved. The reporters pounded the keyboards. According to Eddie, this list was really more of a border than a document, beneath the surface, yet enforced with a chilling exactness. Once you speak against someone on that list, your name gets passed around in whispers, not because you did anything wrong, but because you talked. He pointed out, this is how Diddy stayed untouchable for so long. It wasn't just his lawyers. It wasn't just his money. It was the fear. Fear of what it would mean to speak his name in a negative light. Murphy asserted that Diddy was shielded from anybody who didn't show up to the events, since many had built their careers on his generosity. Tyler Perry was aware, Eddie remarked. So did others. And they didn't have to participate in the darkness. They just had to look away. The prosecution wanted to know whether Eddie had ever discussed the list with anybody. At that, he gave a little nod. A fellow actor told me, "You're crossing the line, man. They don't come back for people who cross it." Murphy didn't reveal the identity of the actor, but he did imply that the two were friends in the past. The two of them have not communicated since, he stated frankly. That's the price. You speak the truth. You lose your circle. Judge allowed Murphy to provide evidence of a marked shift in tone from key contacts following the notorious party in the form of email chains, text messages, and call logs with dates. They don't inform you when they're disconnecting you, Eddie clarified. They just stop replying. Your name goes from must-have to not now. Following this, the day's most damaging announcement arrived. You think Diddy blackballed people alone? He had help. He had protection. He had a whole damn network. His gaze shifted to the jurors. This isn't just about what happened in that house. It's about how many people kept it quiet. How many signed checks to make it go away. How many built empires, while the rest of us disappeared. Due of its length, continued in the last message, final section of revised transcript. Following his account of his career's demise, Eddie Murphy moved into more subdued terrain. When he shifted his tone from discussing facts to expressing feelings, the courtroom paid close attention. His personal impact on these encounters was the subject of the prosecution's questioning. After a lengthy moment of staring ahead, Eddie finally responded, "It broke me. Not all at once, but little by little. A career doesn't vanish overnight. It dissolves. And the more I tried to pretend I was okay, the more it ate me alive." Even his closest pals were in the dark about what had transpired, he said. "Because nobody would believe me," replied the man. "And worse, if they did believe me, they'd be next." He spoke about times when he was completely silent. "There were days where I didn't leave the house. I'd sit in the same chair replaying that night. Not because of what was done to me, but because of what I saw done to others. The fear in their faces, the fake smiles, the people who thought they had no choice." Eddie started to rely on his family more and more. "My kids saved me. I'd hear them laughing in another room, and it would bring me back, remind me of what was real, what mattered." Additionally, he relied on faith, not for the sake of exposure, but as a means of survival. "I stopped asking God why. I started asking Him when. When was I going to speak? When was the world going to listen? When would truth mean more than money?" There was complete silence in the courtroom. It was disclosed that Eddie sought treatment, spiritual guidance as well. He needed assistance in overcoming the shame of abandoning people while he walked away. "I kept wondering, should I have done more? Should I have pulled someone out of that house with me?" With a moment, he spoke, gave Diddy a look. "But I realize now, the most dangerous thing I could have done was stay silent. And I stayed silent for too long." His lack of published works and exposure in media outlets was questioned by the prosecution, and Eddie grinned sourly. Because the people who own the microphones are the same people who own the secrets. He closed the piece with an incredibly relatable statement. "I lost the spotlight, but I found my peace. And honestly, that was the first real role I ever played. A man finally free of the lie." The prosecutor moved at a leisurely pace. "Mr. Murphy, why now? Why speak today after all this time?" Eddie sighed. The mystery lingered like smoke in the room. "Because the walls are finally falling," he informed us. "For the first time, I'm not the only one saying it. For the first time, the world is listening." He claimed that something changed inside of him the moment he witnessed Cassie Ventura on the stand and heard her voice quiver as she recounted the atrocities she had suffered. After then, Monique took the stand, her testimony a mixture of years of suffering, transcripts, and receipts. Next came the resurrected Prince recording, a guy who had been deceased for a long time, but whose warnings had been unpopular during his lifetime. After giving it some thought, Eddie decided he couldn't sit out this one. Not again, not while the blood was still wet on the floor. He said that for a long time, he was paralyzed with dread, both of reprisal and of losing his job, insecurity at the potential distortion of his truth. "I saw what happened to people who spoke out. They weren't just canceled, they were erased. But the stillness was now completely broken. Everything had altered after the trial. Eddie warned the jurors that a chain reaction was taking place. And I'd rather be the next one to fall for the truth than sit on the sidelines protecting a lie. He detailed how the public's perspective changed, not due to headlines, but because of the statements made on oath, as he witnessed Diddy shout in court and the defenses fall apart. I don't need a book deal. I don't need redemption. I need peace. And peace only comes when the truth is louder than the lie. He went on to say that his kids were older now and had lately asked him why he had quit performing. And I couldn't look them in the eye and say, because I got tired, because that wasn't true. I stopped because I wasn't willing to lose myself to gain a career. His gaze shifted to the jurors. I'm not doing this to bring Diddy down. I'm doing this so nobody ever has to be built up by him again. The judge announced a short break. Dozens of his fellow jurors came to their feet in respect as Eddie did. And it wasn't only out of formality that they did it. Something was different in the air as court resumed. Greater in mass, with more concentration. I think we can all agree that Eddie's stand-up stint is coming to a close. However, his last twist was completely unexpected. One more question was posed by the prosecutor. In your opinion, Mr. Murphy, what's the most important thing the jury and the public should take from your testimony today? For a considerable amount of time, Eddie held his breath. Additionally, they leaned closer to the microphone. That Hollywood doesn't run on talent. It runs on submission. A drop of a pin could be heard. Eddie continued. It rewards obedience, not integrity. And the minute you stop nodding, stop pretending, you find yourself on the outside looking in. His words were, what happened at Diddy's parties wasn't some isolated pocket of chaos. It was a system, a well-oiled, intentionally hidden engine that ran on fear, favors, and forced silence. I saw good people turn into puppets. I saw grown men eat monkey brains just to get on a casting sheet. And the ones who laughed the loudest? They were the ones pulling the strings. After that, he fixed his gaze on the defense table. This man didn't build an empire. He built a trap. And too many of us walked right into it, thinking we were climbing stairs. Eddie turned his gaze back to the jurors. I could have said something sooner. I should have. But I'm saying it now, because what's done in the dark is coming to light. And y'all are the first ones to see it, without blinking. The next statement was the one that went viral even before the court session ended. Don't protect the pretty lie. Let the truth be ugly. Get up, he said. The court honored him. Empty courtroom. Diddy, who was clearly distressed, remained silent. Former comic superstar Eddie Murphy has just given his most solemn testimony to date. As a result, he could have altered the course of events.